I want you to get together.
But yeah, on the Tartarian stuff, like I said, I was listening to Shelley talk about it on her show today, and she was trying to figure out, like my video was that maybe brought a lot of you people here, who are we if the millennial reign has already happened exactly? Who does that make us as a peoples? Where do we fit into the narrative of this particular timeline if that's true? And I don't have the answers to this specifically. I speculated in that video that it says there's the first those who take part in the first resurrection are blessed because they get to reign with Jesus Christ for 1,000 years. The first resurrection are the martyrs who died in Christ's name during the tribulation. And they get to basically become saints, from what I've gathered. And then it says the rest of the dead weren't resurrected until the 1,000 years was over. And I assumed, well, that would mean basically we are the descendants of those resurrected immediately after the millennial reign. That's what it seems to what it says, the rest of the dead. So the rest of the dead who maybe didn't know Christ or never had a chance to know Christ are born again during this little season period. And that was my first assumption. Again, I don't know this. I was just spitballing. And the idea is, we are the descendants of, and our spirits, our souls, are those, let's say, children who never got a chance to be born, or those who lived in a place where they never got to hear the Gospels, people who never had a chance at salvation or get to have their chance now. But obviously there are issues with that, because it does say in the Bible, it's appointed for a man to die once and then judgment. So I can't square it exactly, and there are holes in that theory, I'll admit. And Shelley was trying to square it too, and she was speculating, well, what if we're not that? Because the Bible doesn't specifically say, when the rest of the dead are resurrected after. It just says after the millennial reign, or the rest of the dead are resurrected, but it doesn't say when. It doesn't say it's immediate. So maybe my theory that they were immediately those people is wrong. And she was speculating, well, what if there are people who lived through tribulation and also lived through the millennial reign, and not everybody was resurrected who lived during the millennial reign. There may have been people who were resurrected who had perfect brand new bodies, you know what I mean? And these were the saints, these are the martyrs. But then the rest of the people who just kept living normally, didn't have extended lifespans, you know what I mean? Just continued to live in their normal bodies, reproducing, having families. They also lived through the millennial reign. And it's possible, yeah, many of them did give themselves over to Christ during that time because they could see him right there in front of them with their own eyes. It was undeniable by that point, Jesus Christ was king, and the whole world followed him then in that millennial reign. There may have been struggles and battles and fights to get it to that point. It might not have been imminent and straight away. Jesus may have had to do his, go throughout the world and show the situation for what it truly was to everybody. But there may have been people around who weren't in the glorified, resurrected bodies. They were just descendants of people who survived through the millennial reign. And it's possible when the millennial reign ended and the saints went to the camp of saints, and basically camped there, boxed themselves in there. We don't know where that is. We theorize it's the North Pole because it's the middle of everything. It would make sense, because it says when Satan gathers his army, they encircle the camp of saints after traveling up the broad part of the earth. So, in order to encircle something, it implies all corners of the earth come together to one point, which would be the center, which would be the North Pole, right? So, that makes sense in terms of geography, kind of. But what about all the people who didn't go to the camp of saints that lived through the millennial reign? They're still around. And it's possible we are the descendants of those people who lived through the millennial reign, who weren't the resurrected. They were just people, and that's who we are, and we're still having our chance, and she explains that, you have these insane asylums, don't you, which were just packed full of people everywhere during this time period, during the reset period after the millennial reign ended. And she was saying there's a huge long list of reasons why you could get chucked in one of these things, and one of them was religious fanaticism. And she was explaining how it's possible that there were a lot of people who were refusing to let go or stop telling everybody that the millennial reign has already come. While Satan's kingdom was happening and more people working for Satan in these secret societies were spreading false doctrines that the millennial reign is yet to come, there were still loads of people everywhere who have descendants who lived through the millennial reign. They're like, no, Jesus has already come and ruled. We know exactly who we are and when we are. This is Satan's season, and all those people needed to be shut up, basically. So they all got crammed into these insane asylums until their generations died out, and those generations that came after them didn't know their crazy stories anymore, and it became a thing of the past, and history was rewritten and changed, and all knowledge that the millennial reign had come and gone dissipated with each passing generation, and up through to the 1800s to the 1900s to now were the descendants of these people who were either locked up, and deceived. And she explains how all the orphans that were around everywhere during this period, and these massive orphan trains just moving children all over the Americas and all over the earth, these huge orphan trains everywhere, just packed full of kids, just populating cities everywhere. Well, these were the children of those who lived through the millennial reign who refused to shut up. And they had their kids taken off them, they were locked up, and these children were everywhere made orphans. You know what I mean? And that's who we are. We are the descendants of these orphans, basically, who were also the children of those who lived through the millennial reign, and were the descendants of those who lived through the millennial. So that's an interesting way of viewing it. And it kind of squares the idea, that, every man is appointed to die only once. And it stops the reincarnation theorizing from happening as well, which is difficult to understand. But she also brought up, that Lazarus technically died and Jesus rose him from the dead. So he died once and was risen from the dead and continued to live. But he wasn't reincarnated. He wasn't brought back into a new body. He was still Lazarus. You know what I mean? So it's different, isn't it, in a way? He was only dead for a couple of days. So I suppose it's quite not the same, but it's not unprecedented to assume that people can live twice. There is a biblical precedence for it, but again, that can be squared by saying, well, Lazarus only died so Jesus could resurrect him, to prove that Jesus had the ability to conquer death. It was all working for God's purpose. That was the point, And there wasn't anyone else he raised from the dead. The whole point of Lazarus dying was to be resurrected again, as a sign, So again, I just thought it was interesting. I think her answer is probably better than mine, because again, I just assume, because it said, the rest of the dead live not again until the millennial reign had ended in Revelations 20, meant, well, that means, once everyone who lived during the millennial reign goes to this city, the beloved city, and disappears to the North Pole, the world needs to be populated again. And what if suddenly people start coming into existence who are being resurrected for the final resurrection? But then it's like, well, wouldn't they have to die? Well, I mean, wouldn't these people have to live forever until the end and then the judgment? But they're not. People still die during this time, which means there has to be another resurrection, a third resurrection after all of this to bring everybody back. You know what I mean? And that's not biblical. It doesn't say there's a third resurrection anywhere, just two. So it's difficult, isn't it? That's a hole in the theory. The only way I could think that my theory could still work is that we're assuming that the great white throne judgment at the end of time is a physical one. What if the great white throne judgment at the end of time happens when everybody's dead and all life on earth is gone? Because it says this army he builds encircles the camp of saints. Then he brings fire down from heaven, which destroys them, kills everything, likely just destroys the whole earth, turns it into a smouldering, unlivable mess, no life whatsoever anywhere. And then the great white throne judgment happens at the end, in the spiritual realm, not in the physical world. So everybody's dead, and all the spirits that are asleep wake up for judgment. All those who just immediately died in that war immediately end up in the spirit realm at the great white throne for judgment. And it's not no one has to be resurrected for that final judgment, because everybody's dead by that point, and we're all in the spirit realm being judged there. That's one way I could think of squaring it, my own theory. So Shelley's theory is that we are the descendants of those who lived through the millennial reign, who weren't a part of the first resurrection, but were just people. That's why we're not in glorified bodies. That's why we're still just normal people. That's why we still have short lifespans. Only a select few had that privilege of extended life in a new body. Those were the saints who are now in the camp of saints. and we just keep living and dying as normal people as we always have done, even today in Satan's little season. That's one theory. My theory was that a bunch of people were suddenly resurrected during this time, which were those who didn't know Christ or never had a chance at salvation, and we get to all these souls get to come into this world for the little season and live their second chance to make a choice, Jesus or no. You know, we have a chance now because this whole world knows Jesus. There isn't a corner of this earth that doesn't know that name. We can know him now, you know, and there may have been times in history where people could not have known him because of geography, you know. And now it's different because all the information is everywhere and it's all there out in the open for you to get to know if you want to. So my theory was that these are the resurrected people, and it was immediately after. And that's why we have orphans everywhere. That's why we have Cabbage Patch babies just suddenly sprouting out of the ground. You know what I mean? That's why we have just these people everywhere out of nowhere after a great reset. It's because they just did kind of just randomly appear. Like, and one theory, somebody said, why is everyone wearing top hats and suits and looks really well dressed in these old photos? And the theory was, well, they were all wearing their funeral clothing. Like, they're all dressed in their Sunday best because that's what they were buried in. I thought that was an interesting concept. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I like that kind of out of the box thinking, you know. So yeah, Shelley's theory is that we're the descendants of the people who lived through the millennial reign. My theory is that we're the descendants of the dead that were resurrected with a chance to know Christ again. Through Shelley's version, she can justify that the Great White Throne Judgment would happen because there'll be the final resurrection right at the end of time, where everybody gets a body and then judgment. My theory implies that the judgment might be completely spiritual and there'll be no physical flesh alive when the judgment finally happens. So there's two ways we can go about it there. There's two narratives, isn't there? Which can be kind of be biblically squared, but both have problems. So I'm just trying to hash it out. I don't know what you guys think. Do you have any theories on the matter? You know, but I'm trying to hash it out in my mind. And I just find it interesting that we have these two narratives that could be the case. And I need to talk to Shelley. I need to actually talk to her about this and have a conversation about it. You know, because I don't know. And I think she's like me. She's open to just discuss it, and she's not dogmatic about any way. You know, and I'm the same. And I think we could have a really, really fruitful, useful conversation to try and hash out the ideas involved with it. And I think it's interesting that we both have differing perspectives that are similar and different. So I think we could have some fun with it. If anyone knows her or talks to her regularly, reach out to her for me, please. I've already reached out, and like I said, we're kind of going through a back and forth, but I need to kind of rev it back up.
I want you to get together